is usually my demonstration day, and today I'm going to be talking about magic. But I'm not going to demonstrate. This is more I guess, a theoretical look at magic, and I will be discussing and explaining different systems of magic. And I didn't think that it was appropriate in this case to actually do that with maps, miniatures, and dice. So we're not going to be using maps, miniatures, and dice. I can see Fred Hubbard's already here talking about spell failure, and Charles, you're talking about spell points or mana points. Yes, they are topics for today. I've got a poll. I'm going to put it up. Feel free to take part in that poll. If you're not too sure what the responses mean, then just wait, hold off so I can explain things, and then respond to it once you're ready. Okay, so grab some food, some drink, make sure you're comfortable, and then I will get started, and we'll do this fairly quickly. I will be going over, giving sort of a brief overview as to what I'll be covering today. Anyway, right, let's do this. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about role-playing games, tabletop role-playing games. And specifically, I would like to talk about the concept of magic and magic mechanics. Because you might be thinking that there's only one way to run magic in a tabletop role-playing game, but actually there's many different ways to run magic. And I've recently found myself experiencing more different types of magic systems than I have ever in my life. So some good things have come out of the changes that have been occurring on my channel, which is getting a better understanding of different systems of magic. And surprisingly, sometimes the one that we use the most is not necessarily the best system, in my opinion. And there's definitely room for something else to be tried. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be covering today, I'll be talking about Vancian magic, which is what you're dealing with Dungeons and Dragons, Vancian magic. Okay, Jack Vance, this is Dying Earth, those books. I'm going to talk about that. I'll do that first because that's probably the one that people know the most about. I'll then be talking about chaotic magic failure. So this is really what Fred Hubbard was highlighting, the concept of spell failure by percentage, but there's not just percentage that you can use. Spell failure, there's a couple of different ways it can be done, okay? And I'll be going over that as well. I'll be talking about mana points or dice pulls. You can also call mana points can be called, or mana pulls can also be called spell points. It's really the same sort of thing. You have a set of points or values and you can only use them a certain number of times. We'll get to that. Anyway, and then I'll be talking about elemental magic. Now, does that mean that I have covered every type of magic that you could have in a tabletop role-playing game? No, it doesn't. But at least gives you an idea of some of the magic systems that are out there. And I feel like it will be covering enough of the systems to be of some value to you. And so you can kind of get an idea of, like, what is it that you want to get out of your game? Are you looking to make a variant rule, apply it to your game, whatever you're playing, and use magic in a different way? Because, again, this is not just about magic mechanics, it's about variant rules and magic mechanics. And we need to sort of break that down. Okay, so let's start off with the first one. And the first one I'm going to say is Vancian magic. So for those of you, very quick, I'm not going to take too long. So Gary Gygax used Vancian magic. Now, Vancian magic is going back to the concept of Jack Vance, who did the Dying Earth series, and these stories used magic in a particular way. So magic is very limited, and only only so many spells can be cast in one day. You don't have an unlimited pool of magic that you can use. There's a limit to it, but also much worse than that, when you cast a spell, the information, the ability and knowledge to cast that spell is lost to you. You have to memorize it. And of course, every day, once you've lost that information, you have to rememorize that spell again, because the strain on your body and your mind is so great that it disappears from your mind and you don't have it anymore. If anything, I would say Vancian magic works best with wizards. A lot of the other spellcasters, it kind of doesn't quite mesh very well. I think clerics in D&D and bards and your sorcerer and your warlock, doesn't really work very well. But with a wizard, it kind of makes sense for Dungeons and Dragons. So that's one way of looking at it. Now, Vancian magic is broken up into known spells, prepared spells, spell slots, but it doesn't actually have to be broken up that way. one of the one of the things that I would say is that known spells are essentially the spells that you know, and they'll be written in a book. They are possibly they're etched into a skull. They're the things that you know. Now, then you have prepared spells. These are the spells that, from that pool of known spells, you can only prepare so many in a given day. And in the past, the concept of known spells and prepared spells tended to be essentially the same thing. We didn't differentiate it. Now, in 5e, they've differentiated known spells from prepared spells, and so we've got that. Then you had spell slots. Spell slots are basically, there's only so many spells of a certain level that you can cast. Say, for example, if you have a first level spell, you can only cast, if you're low level, 1 or 2 of these. If it's a cantrip, a 0 level spell, you can cast them as many times as you like. So there's no limit on that one because they're so low in power. But if we're dealing with a 9th level spell and you're level 20, you can only cast 1 9th level spell. No matter how many different types of 9th level spells you've prepared, it won't matter. You could only ever cast 1 of those. Now, one of the things that I think is unfortunate with the development of a game system is that we've probably gone backwards a little bit. This is just my opinion. I'm just going to put this in here. Having known spells and prepared spells being differentiated has caused a lot of confusion for people. It's added 3 different levels of complexity to Vancian magic, where in the past it only had 2 levels of complexity generally. Okay, so I would say the worst magic system that now exists in modern games is actually 5e when it comes to Vancian magic. If you're going to have Vancian magic, 5e probably does it worse than anybody else does, which is weird because you would think that isn't 5e supposed to be like the most elegant system out there, but it's not elegant. This is one of the reasons why you'll notice the designers right now during Unearthed Arcana, as they build up to 2024, they are pulling back away from having the differentiation between known spells and prepared spells. They're kind of pushing them together and making them the same thing, like was in the past. Like, okay, if you know the spell, it's prepared. Okay, that's it. You have a list of spells and you prepare off that list. That's it. Whereas we had now we have a list of spells in 5e, then you know certain spells off that list, and then from that list of known spells, we break it down again to prepared spells. I'm not a fan of Vancian magic. It has its place, as I said. I think the wizard is probably the best place for it to live. Okay, let's move on to probably more interesting to me, and that is chaotic magic failure, or hazard tables, or percentages, whatever you want to call it. So this is where magic is used. It is dangerous. Spell casting has consequences. You can't be sure what will actually happen with this type of magic. Now, early versions of spellcasting failure looked like a percentage. You had a percentage chance of failing to cast a spell successfully. And things that would affect it would be things like armor, what your level you were, how proficient you were. You may even have a modifier that changed your percentage chance of spell failure. It gives you a lot of control over the mechanics, but it's a pain to implement. When you start having to roll on a percentage dice and deal with percentages, because you can wind up with percentages having to be added up from various sources. Now, the idea being that as you level up, you'll find that your percentage it's something you'll calculate when you level up, and then, of course, anything changes and you'll re-evaluate what that percentage will be. So the calculations are there, okay, and you're only probably going to have to do it every time you level up, more than likely, but it's still there. So it's not necessarily as bad as, okay, I've got 5 different percentages I have to add together to figure out my true percentages for my spell failure. But it does slow down the game. I think percentage systems do slow down the game, because they usually also have a lot of different factors that affect spell failure that can't be calculated in advance. And one of those is spell resistance percentages. This is where there's a percentage chance that a spell will be resisted by a monster, maybe by a spell, another spell, or an area. So, but particularly monsters will have spell resistance percentages. This is older versions of D&D and role-playing games, but mostly D&D. And it adds an additional level of complexity to spell failure that wasn't there before. And it actually becomes more of a chore when you have to deal with that. Now, I'm not saying that you playing that way is bad. I'm just saying that the reality is it does add a lot of additional management, and you really need to know what you're doing, and you need to be able to remember all this stuff if you're going to use a system like this. It's not an elegant system, but it gives you lots of really fine control over how it will look. The next one is you can still have magic failure. You can still have spell failure, but you can simplify the system so that you're not dealing with having to add a lot of percentages together to figure out what your final percentage will be. Okay, and the easiest way to do that, and a lot of older versions of or clones of D&D, but not older versions of D&D, but older clones of Dungeons and Dragons actually do this. Okay, Dungeon Crawl Classics has this sort of system in place, although I would say theirs is quite a complicated table system. You can have spell failure or mishap tables. They better represent a spell not being completely reliable. The idea being that magic is dangerous now, okay, and therefore there's a chance it will not work the way you were hoping. But not only that, it might have an unknown effect that could be positive, but also could be negative, which could be quite interesting too. Of course, you would prefer to have the positive result rather than the negative result. And an easy way to actually adjudicate this is to have a spell check made whenever you cast a spell. Now, you might apply it to all spells. You might only apply it to spells that have a level 1 upwards. You might have cantrips that always work. Like, you can do it a couple of different ways. But it's as simple usually as whatever your spell bonus is adds to a dice roll, and that number is then compared. And if you hit a particular level, quite often they set, I've seen it done in Shadow Dark, is quite interesting in that they use 10 plus the spell level. That's the DC. That's the difficulty class. That is the target number you're going for. And I was thinking I might really like this, but also I was thinking this is really abusable, right? You'd think this is a system that would be easily abused if you could cast a spell as many times as you like, and all you have to do is do a spell casting check. Because what happens if I keep succeeding on my spell casting check? The problem is you don't. The problem is that the more times you cast a spell, the more likely you're going to fail. It's only a matter of time. Okay, your chances continue to increase that you will finally roll too low and will not get the spell to go off. And it's quite interesting because then you have to fall back on spells you would not normally have had to use. So it's got a very interesting dynamic, but it's certainly a lot simpler. And if you can have it as simple as, if you fail, you lose the spell and you don't get access to the spell for a certain period of time. Quite often it's like a day or a couple of days. A day is nice and easy to sort of manage because you can kind of track that a lot better. If you have a certain number of days, it's going to get complicated, right? What I thought was very interesting when I was playing through Shadow Dark is that I had to then start considering, like, are there certain spells I need to hold off on casting? Now, when I thought about it later on, I was like, actually, if I didn't rely quite so much on certain spells and I cast them less, then there's a better chance that I'll be able to use them when I need them. So it's not like you're opening the Pandora's box and making it too easy for people to play the game. One of the really interesting things, and this is not so much spell failure, and if anything, it's another effect. That is, imagine you have a spell casting system where you can cast the spell. The spell will go off, okay? If you succeed on your attack roll or the saving throws, is failed by the enemy, or your spell check is successful, or whatever system it is. If it's automatic, it's going to work. But you have a magic surge table. Now, people are probably very familiar with the magic surge table from 5e for the sorcerer, but it gives you a secondary effect. So you cast the spell, but the spell doesn't always work exactly the way you're expecting. And what you do is you get the spell effect, plus you get an additional thing that might happen. This might be something that is positive, might be something that's negative. Seems to work. I've done it with my group for over a year, and it seems to work really well thematically with a sorcerer, where don't have kind of control over the magic that they are casting that, say, a wizard would have, because a wizard is studying books, whereas a sorcerer is kind of feeling magic rather than learning it from books. And so there's a more trial and error taking place, and so that's what a magic surge table can do. And one of the things I noticed with a 5e rule system, that table, like, you don't get to roll enough on that. Like, turning into a pot plant, a sheep, having a fireball descend upon everybody. I mean, obviously a bad situation. Blowing bubbles, having your hair disappear or turn into feathers, various things. It's really, really interesting. It actually makes the idea of somebody casting a spell far more entertaining for everybody, not just the person doing it. Now, one of the things I noticed is when I did this with my home group, and we used a magic surge table where you get a secondary effect when you cast a spell, we decided to do that with every single casting of a spell of level 1 or higher. And we decided in the end, which was really weird, because quite often when we try a new role or a new subclass or a new class, new spells, new features, new feats, we'll tend to ban things or keep things. And in this case, we decided that if we ever had another sorcerer, they would be operating the way of, we did forget about a 20-sided dice roll. There's always going to be a secondary effect, just because it made the campaign so much more entertaining. We almost died many times as a result, and we were saved many times as a result. So I just thought I'd point that out. So there's a couple of different ways. So you can have a secondary effect table. You could have a table that you use if you say fail really badly, or if you fail, whether you fail, and get a 1 on your dice, or if you fail by 5 points or whatever it might be with your DC check. It's a couple of different ways. Probably tables are your go-to for a more failure chaotic system. Next, a drink of water, followed by spell points, mana pools, mana dice, spell dice, things like that. So mana pools, spell points, this is a finite resource. Like, you only get so many you can use in a given period of time. And they can be used for a range of different magic. When the effect, there'll be effects that will create mana for you. And of course, the player character has to then track that mana pool or those spell points. So one of the things I think that's really interesting is that really what you're doing is you're using it like a currency. Like spell points, mana points, it's like you're paying for the use of a spell or an ability that's magical in some way. And you might use one of these, 2 of these, 3 of these, depending on how powerful the effect or the spell is. But one of the things you do notice is, like, the mana points can only be used once. That's it. You only get to use them once. They're not. It's not like if you've got 10 of these, every time you use them, you still have 10. They're going to reduce. Okay. You will always be reducing or removing them until they're no longer available. Until you get down to the point where you have 0 mana. Okay, or 0 spell points. Mana points can be restored a couple of different ways, and there's different methods. Sometimes it'll be resting. Sometimes you'll be required to meditate for a period of time. You might have a mana regeneration potion. So quite often, if you see in video games, you'll see a mana regeneration potion. Eating a magical fruit commonly can restore mana points. Drinking magical blood, possibly. Drinking or bathing in a physical mana pool or a liquid pool of some kind. I guess the best example I can think of is like video games, but also another representation of this would be the old Tron movie, where the programs actually drink from pool of radiating water, and that revitalizes them so that they have energy to continue on. It's kind of like that. Like you can use, I mean, whether you call it a mana pool or an energy pool, spell points, it can be anything like that. So you've just got to decide, how do you regenerate your mana pool, your spell points? There's got to be a way of getting them back. Is it going to be, okay, I need to take a rest, okay, for 8 hours, 10 hours, 1 hour, like what is it going to be? Commonly, it's going to be you get them back the next day. Yeah, they regenerate a certain period of time. This is for a tabletop game, right? So mana dice can replace mana points, or spell dice can replace mana points too. And it essentially works exactly the same way. The only difference is that number of dice that you roll for your mana dice, or the number of dice you have available, they create the magic or cast the spell, and the numerical result determines the success and failure, possibly the resulting effect. So how effective it might be. So if you roll 1 dice and you get a 6, it's successful. If you roll two dice but you only get a 2 and a 4, it's not successful. Being that the number of 6s that you roll determines whether you get success or not. That's a very, very simple way. Like, a good example, I guess, I can think of is HeroQuest does this, actually, where if you want a magical effect to actually be activated, you roll 6-sided dice, and you have a certain number of 6-sided dice that you can roll, and you have to get a 6 to be successful. But you can have an increasing process where, if you've got enough rolls and space, you can actually have the more 6s you roll, the better the result. Okay. Or you are adding the dice together, and the numerical result determines your success. So if you roll a 3 and a 4, say, and you needed to get a 6, 3 and a 4 together gives you 7, so you're succeeding. Okay, so there's your mana pools and dice. Still a relatively simple system. It does utilize dice, and players like rolling dice, as we know. So you haven't eliminated dice rolling. Mana points and spell points, a little bit different, because now you have to assign a point cost to every spell they cast when you're developing your system. Yeah? How's it going, Luna? I just want to say, by the way, Fred Hubber and Charles are both patrons. Thank you for being here. Luna, what do you got here? I like the unlimited magic with chance to fail. Kind of gives a risk-reward feel to you. Yes. Now, you might be thinking, and I've said this before, and I'll come back to it, that giving somebody unlimited access to a spell they can cast means that, man, they're just it's going to be overpowered. It actually doesn't feel that overpowered. I can assure you, I did not feel that overpowered playing Shadow Dark. It was still very lethal. Anyway, let's move on to elemental magic. So this is magic that uses the elements of some kind. So the ability to use elemental forces, create magical effects and spells, and you're using the elements. All the elemental magical power that you're harnessing or tapping into, you're taking from the sources of the elements. And they might be taking energy or using elemental energy from nearby items. So it might be an item that gives off the energy that you require. It might be the environment. You might be drawing it out of the environment itself. This might be life force. You might be taking it from another creature, drawing it out of them in some way. Even elemental might be, I guess, a good example. If we look at modern concepts, we can say the force would be an example of elemental magic or elemental force in some way. Although, in some respects, I think the force feels more like spirit. But anyway, we could say that elements, in terms of elements, spirit might be one of those elements anyway. So the elements of the air can be used to sort of help you fly, create wind, breathe air underwater, summon, say, an air elemental, generate storms. So you're dealing with an air effect if you're dealing with, you're dealing with wind, you're dealing with air and the movement of it. The element of fire might give you access to things like generating fire, controlling fire, forming a fire wall, hurling fireballs, extinguishing fire, okay, summoning fire elementals, and a raft of other things, creating light of some source or kind. And then next we have elements of water, where you modify that element in some way. So you could freeze the water to ice. You could create water where there was not water before. You could form in a mist. You could summon a water elemental. You could shape water and control it in some way. So there's lots of different things going on there. You might be even able to draw water out of something else. Maybe you draw water out of another creature or out of the element around you. So look, I guess a good example of this would be Sub-Zero. Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat, and is it Mr. Freeze from The Incredibles, where they actually draw the moisture out of the air around them, and they can form it and then use it in some way. And then we have the element of earth, where you can transform and shift stone, dirt, and sand. This might include things like building an earth wall, digging a hole, creating earthquakes, summoning an earth elemental. There's a couple of different things. And then lastly, for those of you who are familiar with the fifth element, we have the fifth element, which is the element of spirit. Quite often when you're dealing with a magic source that deals with elements, it's not just air, fire, water, and earth. We also have spirit. And spirit is like the ability to communicate and cooperate with souls and the ethereal aspect of the world or other creatures. You know, they're at a different level than you are, or they've passed on, or something like that. So the spirit element would be allowing you to communicate with, say, the undead or the dead. Astrally projecting yourself, just your soul or your spirit in some way, restoring life, necromancy, so bringing dead corpses back to life would be sort of part of that. Changing time, like actually affecting time in some way. Healing emotions, affecting emotions, summoning angels, demons, and devils. That sort of all falls under the spirit, ghost, soul, ethereal sort of realm, okay? All the things that isn't covered by air, fire, water, and earth. Now, a system like this is like Avatar, the Last Airbender, is probably a really good example of this kind of magic. A magic source like this is going to be relatively complicated unless you can figure out how to make it simpler. but I still think it has a lot of worth. I mean, if anything, you can probably use a Vancian magic or a spell failure or a magic failure system in conjunction with this without too much trouble. You could even use a mana pull or mana points or spell point system, and you're just using your elemental magic as the thematic and narrative aspect of it in some way. Now, that was all that I wanted to present for today. It's all that I had time to process in my busy life, and I am happy to discuss more magic systems. But I wanted to say quickly, hey, thank you to my patrons who support me on Patreon so that I can talk about these topics. I want to thank you for watching and taking part in the poll. I do appreciate it. Thank you for doing so. I hope that this was useful in some way. I will continue the discussion. The discussion has not ended, for those of you who are wondering, but my presentation of the topic has ended. Now it is time for you to put forward your ideas and your feedback. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, all right, I'm back. Let's do chat. I've waffled on for a while. I'm going to leave the poll up, but I love talking about magic and all its and all its forms, and so it would be really interesting to share some of the ideas that people have here, and see if we can sort of nut out a few things ourselves. And if people are working on magic systems that they've they want to sort of present, like we can do that. Now, I do have a magic system that I have used. So Mazes and Monsters that I have been developing actually has a magic system. It's a very, very simple, flexible narrative system designed to be used by children and adjudicated by a parent. And it is simply a DC or target number system where I give you some guidance as to what type of magic would fall at what level, and you simply roll a dice and add a modifier. So you're going to cast your magic casting, your whatever number you have for your magic, you roll a 20-sided dice and then you consult the table. And it's part of the free PDF of Mazes and Monsters on my Patreon. And you're welcome to go and check it out and see what you think. If it's suitable for you, I can assure you it is super simple. It is designed so you do not have to have a huge list of spells. You do not need to worry about anybody learning a whole lot of spells, because you make up your own spells and your own magic. And the Game Master adjudicates how it's going to work. They figure out where that falls, what the number will be, and then you roll some dice. And that's it. It's as simple as that. Okay, right, Charles. So, Charles, did I cover spell points to the extent that you were hoping? Because I hope I did. Mana equals spell points. Yes, it kind of does. It's kind of like the same topic. All right, so Luna, okay. I'd be curious to find out if there is a system of a variant that ties spellcasting to con and intelligence, or some way to represent the strain on your body and mind during casting. Okay, so it's a good question, Charles. So I've had this discussion with AJ Pickett. Now, for those of you who don't know, AJ Pickett does a lot of lore videos, and we've had the discussion around if you're spellcasting and say you are a wizard. Why is it that a wizard is only really reliant on intelligence to cast these spells? Because the physical exertion of casting those spells is so great. You would think that a wizard is just a spindly old man, but no. They might actually have to be quite physically tough, not necessarily strong, but tough. Like be able to concentrate on what they're doing for long periods of time. Which kind of sort of suggests that something like stamina and constitution would be very important. So it would be, and I've often kind of felt this way myself, is that my vision of what a wizard is when they're using their intellect, book learning and researching, writing spells and books, and having their magic system based around that, is they're not just intelligent, they've got a lot of stamina. Their endurance. They might actually kind of be quite buff, which I know is not what we traditionally sort of envisage the wizard being. The wizard would not be a fit individual. They might not have big bulging muscles, but their body and their heart, they will have. They're the person who does the marathon run. They run 40 kilometers, and because they have to be able to keep it up. Because holding magic and controlling it for long periods of time is going to be a bit tricky. So I can tell you now there are actually classes that have been created in the past that use con rather than intelligence. I know a lot of people really struggle with that idea, but they do exist. So it's definitely possible. And if you would have to look at 4E if you wanted con-based spell casting, I think. But if you wanted con and intelligence, I'm not too sure about that one. I haven't come across it myself. Anyway, Luna, what do you got here? The mana dice mechanic kind of sounds like the psionic energy dice mechanic a little. Yep, it's the same sort of concept. Whether you call it psionic energy, whether you call it mana dice, whether you call it spell dice, it doesn't matter. It's the same idea. It's really the same idea. What do you got here, Fred? D&D used to have spells that would age the caster when they were used. Yes, they did. Yes, it was like, if you've ever watched the old movie, I think it's The Golden Voyages of Sinbad. and is it Baker, who plays the evil wizard. Whenever he uses magic, his skin wrinkles up and he ages and he gets spots on his skin. He actually physically, it draws so much from you. So it's a good example actually of like the strain of wielding magic is quite tough. Like there's things that could go wrong. Um, an interesting concept, and I wish they would incorporate it into the Warlock, and that is the Warlock drawing on power that is given to them by an entity which is probably very dubious. It would be nice if the magic, as they use it, the more they use it, it transforms them. So if your magic came from a demon, then slowly but surely, by using the magic granted to you by a demon, you are slowly but surely transforming as a warlock into a demon. Or if you're getting your magic from a devil, then you are slowly but surely transforming into a devil, because the kind of magic you're using is questionable. Okay, maybe you're getting your magic from an eldritch horror, like maybe you're getting it from the far realm, and so your body is slowly but surely developing tentacles and additional eyes, and you are finding it more difficult to exist in an air environment, but more you would have to live in, say, a water environment. Like you are affected in that way. It would make the warlock dangerous to play, but far more interesting. And you could wind up at the end having a character that is far from whatever they started as. And I actually think there's a lot to be said for incorporating that kind of theme. And I can assure you that if I ever do anything with the Warlock, which I will, it probably will have a consequence of slowly but surely transforming into some sort of creature related to the patron they have selected. Because I think that kind of works for them. I think that's their thing. There's a heavy toll to be paid for just grabbing great power and not actually going and learning it. But there are huge benefits as well. So are you willing to risk it? You are making a pact. A pact is a pact. A pact's usually not that great. The benefits seem great for you, but actually the benefits to somebody else are even better. Okay, so what else we got here? Like con or int damage. I think it's con for casting and int for casting. There are systems out there that do that. Okay, 4E did have a spellcaster that used con rather than intelligence. Now, what else we've got here? Charles. What representation, limitations, burdens of being a caster? Yeah, so you're talking about like the consequences. Hi Phil, by the way, how are you doing? You're talking about the consequences of using that magic, and which is aging. Aging was one of those things that would be a problem. Another thing that might be, you could wind up with all sorts of diseases or some things cropping up. There's a limited number of times you can do this before you're no longer able to cast magic anymore. This is something like a lot of us sort of assume that the older you get and the more knowledge you get and the more you use magic, the stronger and better you are at using magic. Whereas actually maybe we can go the reverse and say the more you've used magic, the older you get, the less magic you can do. You may not know how to do it, but the strain on you is so great. There's a chance of like serious things happening. Okay, Necromancer. I'm just a late healer. Yes, possibly a late healer. Cure wounds is necromancy. Hey, I guess in many respects it's like, hey, I use magic so I don't lose my friends. And that's necromancy. I bring them back to life. I like to have them still around. They were taken too soon. Dear. What do you got here, Phil? I've pumped a lot of content using pubbed a lot of content mana pulls on DMG on the DM's guild. Okay, because I'm into the Magic the Gathering, color magic fanatic. No, well, look, a lot of people like those sorts of systems, so I get it. How's it going? Prepare, cook, and survive. How are you? I have covered it well. So the spell points, I covered it well enough. Okay, good. Okay, all right. Let's keep going down. I might get to the bottom of this. You never know. What do you got here? Prepare, cook, and survive. You're looking forward to having the PCs have a Magic the Gathering battle to resolve the Magic battle one day, if the opportunity presents itself. So here's a. You're a big fan of endurance magic, Phil? Yeah, I think there's something to be said for magic being dangerous and not always just being a benefit. But of course, we don't. If you're selling to the mass market, you don't want to put anything in there that people might dislike. So Wizards of the Coast is kind of sanitizing magic. It's sanitary magic. It's not dangerous. So going back to the idea of magic between battles, like when they developed something like silvery barbs, which is really doesn't belong, in my opinion. Silvery barbs doesn't belong in Dungeons and Dragons 5e as a generic spell that you can always take, because I would just use that, and we did in my group all the time. But if you're dealing with wizards and spellcasters fighting each other, then silvery barbs makes such a lot of sense. Like even something like the shield spell, where you can block magic, something like counterspell makes so much more sense. Things that are cast to stop incoming attacks of some kind that are of a magical nature. This is where it sort of opens it up. So I'm not a fan of Strixhaven, but in that setting, it makes sense to have, shield spell. It makes sense to have counter spell. It makes sense to have silvery barbs. It makes sense to have sliver mind and various other spells potentially. Things that shut you down, like mind blank, and mind blank basically being a spell that sort of you forget stuff, like. Well, you stop yourself from being mind blanked, actually, if anything. All right, so let's keep going. Right, so what do we got here? Yes, people get upset when I say a warlock has a task to do for a patron. I bet they do, Fred. It's because it's like anything. When you sign on to be a warlock, you just want the benefits. You don't want the penalties. And so, and I think for me, that's kind of one of the things that the warlock kind of, that's where it sits, it would make perfect sense if you are actually a warlock, that you would only want the benefits and not the penalties. So they are forced upon you in some way. And I guess you should. I think the easiest way to get around a problem like that, where players or people are upset that they're playing a warlock and you're requiring them to perform a task for a patron, is if you tell them up front, look, you're playing a warlock. That patron is going to exact some sort of consequence for you using their magic, for using their power. Your power can be taken away, but it also will have consequences every time you use it. You are essentially their minion in many respects. That's the only reason they've given you the power in the first place. Yeah. Saying that up front would probably help a lot for getting people past this dislike of that idea. Endurance magic makes me think of Harry B.C. Dresden. Yeah, the Dresden Files. Yes, for some reason. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. 3E Rukagan had a taint mechanic for using profane demonic magic. Yeah, if you're going to use demonic magic, it kind of makes sense that you'd have some sort of taint going on. So for me, it's always amusing when I hear. So I like movies, people. If you didn't know, I love movies. Always makes me laugh when people talk about, it had terrible special effects. I'm like, is that the only thing you're basing the movie on? Because I'm still fine for them using stop motion animation in movies in modern days. If they wanted to do that, I'd be quite happy. They don't have to do CGI. I always felt like CGI looked a bit flat and a bit plastic at times. And Yeah, I'm just happy. Just making me up a clay model and move that around. I'm all good with that. If you've got the time to sit there moving little bits by just a fraction each time, hey, cool, fine with me. So yeah, Ray, I remember Ray's stuff. I watched a lot of his stuff. Still like it, still love it. What's this? The Pirates. Davy Jones moving characters had transformation magic in a Warlocky narrative. Yeah, yeah, the Pirates movie. Yeah, Davy Jones. Yeah, exactly. There is transformation magic going on there. Yeah, ultra fine print that looks like the line for your signature. Any violation by the patron will be treated as an addendum already agreed to being in the contract. Devils are lawyers. Yes, devils are lawyers. Exactly. A wizard with vast knowledge, but no life left to use it. Yes, that's why you need to have an apprentice. Otherwise, yeah, your information is lost. Somebody else needs to carry it on. Abusive mechanics. Yeah, okay. Abusive mechanics. Yeah, yeah, a little bit. Just a teeny weeny bit. Yeah, most of my wizards are high int, con, and dex. Well, that's because that's how we've been taught to build our wizards. If we build a wizard for Dungeons and Dragons, particularly, we build them high intelligence, high con, high dexterity. Yeah. If the caster lost a week of life for every level spell they cast, one level equals 1 week. Yeah, but you've got to then be able to determine how many years do they live before they would die. How many years can they live before they're no longer able to actually cast magic? That's quite a thing to be asking. With the D&D human with 80 years of life, that'd give them a max of what is it? 4,171 level 1 spells. That's quite a few. It's going to take a little while. Yeah. But here's the thing, if you're playing a dwarf or an elf, like losing a few years is probably not a big deal. Yeah? For a human, it's a big deal. For a dwarf or an elf, this is probably one of the reasons why they don't use this mechanic, is because it would give a dwarf or an elf who have much longer lifespan a huge advantage over humans. And if you've ever noticed, particularly with D&D, humans are always given probably the best chance of success. Well, whether that should be done that way or not, but it almost seems to be the case that you always find that humans are always given the best chance for success. And if you're a spellcaster and you're a human, you don't get the best chance for success. Of course, you can do that differently in your own games. Yeah. What do you got here, Luna? Warlocks are great to play. My DM, when I played mine, had me doing all kinds of silly things because of the patron was an archfey. Yeah, yeah, I bet you. So the archfey, I mean, fey in themselves are mischief makers, aren't they? So yeah, you could find just that makes a lot of sense. So I guess the question is, Luna, did you like the fact that the DM or Dungeon Master, in this case, required you to go and perform certain tasks for your patron as a warlock? Did it actually take something away that you needed to keep? Or did it actually make it more interesting for you? Yeah? Hi, Chris. How are you doing? I've been working on a spell point system where each class gets a magic die. Yes, a magic die, yep. Which is like a hit die, yes. Wizard, for example, gets a d6 hit die and a d12 magic die, yes. Used to recover magic on a rest. Okay. No, I get that. So I did talk about spell points and magic die or magic dice and spell dice before. Just in a very general manner. If you're looking for something that's more around that, I guess what systems are there that use that? The only one that I've ever really played is yeah, they're all board games actually. Now that I think about it, they're not really tabletop role-playing games. They're all board games, so I don't have very much to add for that. Hopefully that'll change in the future. What do you got here, Luna? And the thing I love about the DM was that, the thing, the thing, the Warlocks, that with Warlocks the agreement was a universal law break. Break the agreement. Consequences for either side. Yes, that's always fun too. Like having a break by your patron, having a consequence would be awesome. Yet the Fae are very careful. Yeah, devils and Fae would definitely be very careful about doing that sort of thing. Okay, what do you hear, Fred? Advanced Dungeons and Dragons had tables of how long PCs could live and attribute alterations based on age. Yes, they did. I do remember that. And we aged out PCs. The humans had the ability to go higher level than others. Yes, I remember that. Yep. I mean, I haven't actually, if anything, although I've played bits and pieces of AD&D, I actually haven't played AD&D in its entirety, and like, because I never really understood it. I've played basic or bet me Dungeons and Dragons with Wally, Wally DM, and AJ Pickett and a couple other people, but we haven't played that much. I think we've done all of one session. We're probably going to go back and play more of that, just because it was an interesting experiment, and we kind of like the experience. And Wally is still up for doing that, so that's great. Yeah. Okay, what else we got here? Aging magic would force elves to be an NPC only, but becomes amazing dictator archetypes. Yeah, Phil. Yeah, I suppose you could say that. Yeah, yeah. Elves that use magic that age. Yeah, well, of course. What if your elves don't sort of age out at all? They just get older and older and older. You loved it? Okay. So I think that the thing is, as long as you tell your players, look, this is how this is going to be played, like you have a choice about whether you pick it up or not. I think too many of us are sort of stuck with the idea that we're only ever going to play as it is officially, that's been released by Wizards of the Coast or Paizo or Kobold Press or some sort of third-party publisher. But a lot of us are actually modifying stuff. I mean, let's get real. I think all publishers are prone to the same problem, and that is they make something, they don't really test it. It's not quite what we wanted. I think for years I've been playing spellcasters, and they don't play the way I would like them to play, and they don't play the way a lot of people at my table would like them to play. We've kind of got to the point where we assume that we just have to tolerate what somebody else has made. And this is why we're doing variant tabletop role-playing game rules today. That's the whole point of this in the first place. Made me feel like my character had a job to do because their entity gave him power. Yes, see, you now have another level of investment. I think a lot of people forget that, if you can find something that your character class is connected to, that actually invests the players more in playing in your game. So this is why things like followers and strongholds or castles coming back into D&D or role-playing games are really important as far as I'm concerned, because they help shape the worlds that you're playing in, and they give you another level of commitment. Like, you're not just some wanderer with a bunch of scallywags killing things, taking their stuff, and getting drunk in a pub for the entire campaign or adventure that you're running through. So you can actually do something more than that. You can become more than just that. And I'm not saying that there's nothing. I mean, I've played those types of campaigns before and adventures. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But yeah, if you can connect your magic to your character class more in some way so that it actually stands out. If, like, for those of you who play 5e, I want you to think about how different do you think the wizard is from the sorcerer, the warlock, the bard, and the cleric? I want you to think not about the spells that they cast, because even that, you can pretty much pick up any spell you want if by picking the right subclass in 5e. But I want to think about, in terms of how spells and magic works, how different are they? How much difference is there going on? This is one of the reasons why Wizards of the Coast is having a bit of a problem with the warlock, is they know it's not different enough from the sorcerer. It's too much like the sorcerer. And if they try to go any other direction, it winds up being too much like one of the other spellcasters that are full casters. So, what do you got here, Luna? My DM with the Archfey played the Fey according to real life law. The Fey can't lie. Ah, okay. They can twist the meaning of their words. Interesting. Cool. Well, I've got to the end of the chat, which I'm amazed by. I honestly didn't think that well, no, I didn't. I thought I had. Apparently, I was ready to end this poll and move on off. But I guarantee, Charles, what have you got here? Not different enough. No, Charles, that's what I'm trying to point out, is they just don't operate in a different enough way to make them stand out. Like the warlock having invocations. I like the idea of the invocations, but the way that it's been implemented doesn't work, because the invocations are simply, your invocation is now you can cast magic missile or mage armor. And it's not like warlock spells are just warlock spells. It's not like the spell list for a wizard, a warlock, and all of them have their own spells that nobody else can use. Even when there are supposed to be spells that only a warlock would use, such as, honestly, I think Eldritch Blast is a good example. I feel like Eldritch Blast should never be something another class could ever pick up. It is just for them. It's just their thing. And yet you can. You can get it. It's possible. There are ways. You don't even have to multi-class. You can get it another way. Can be done. The way that they've set things up. Ultimate flexibility, ultimate customization. But yes, it kind of pisses all over the warlock class by doing something like that. Spell abilities don't even match up with how warlocks are described in the player's handbook. That's exactly it, because the warlock and a lot of the other classes probably need to have spells that are very much their own. Like the druid has druidcraft, and it's in its name, druidcraft. Why would anybody else be casting a spell like that? Because it's literally in the name, druidcraft. And so there isn't quite enough variation amongst them. The lore of the warlock was worded, made me think they were kind of ocular. Yeah, I guess they can be. But also too, like, you run into a real big problem when you start. The warlock is a good example of a restriction on the type of spells they can cast, but also the number of spells they can cast based off a mechanic that may never come into play. I think the best implementation of the warlock that I have seen is 4E, where the warlock could cast a certain number of spells during a battle, and they got most of their spells back when they started a new battle. That's it. That's how it worked. But by keying it around a short rest, it's not so much the long rest. The long rest is fine. That's going to apply to pretty much any spellcaster, right? But a short rest, the problem is, will you be in a running battle? If you're in a running battle, like, I can't count the number of times I saw people who had 2 spells and they would have to hang on to them. And like, when's the best time to do this? Because all they were doing was casting Eldritch Blast, and so they're like, all I can do is cast Eldritch Blast, and then I've got 2 other spells I can do, and I don't know when I'm going to need to use them, so I'm waiting. I'm going to save them up for the big battle. And then you get to the end of the day, and they're like, oh, I haven't used my 2 spells up, but I've been hanging on to them just in case. Yeah, and they were described as endlessly pursuing magical knowledge, but their magical abilities are lackluster. Yeah, just a little bit. Just a little bit. Well, I was going to go. If there's nothing more to discuss on magic... Oh, no, I'm not going to get to go anywhere. All right, I guess I'm staying. I thought I was going to be able to run away. I was actually loathing running this live stream today. I was like, do I really want to sit here and talk about magic, variant magic? And much to my surprise, you guys want to discuss it, which is great, which is fine. So let's talk about magic. 3.5. Now, I've played Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, yes. There are some things about 3.5 that I can't stand, but there's some things that I think 3.5 did really well. And 3.5 had just Eldritch Blast, and the invocation changed what it did, and that was about it. Yes. Yep. True. I mean, honestly, I didn't see that many people play. I didn't really see Eldritch Blast show that much when I was playing 3.5. It really didn't. We didn't really have that many people at the table who had Eldritch Blast. Yeah. So maybe I'll ask you a question. For those of you who are still here, I'm going to ask you a question. Let's type this in, and then I'll speak to it a little bit. Hashtag, are you looking forward to any changes to the Wizards of the Coast full casters for D&D? Let's ask that question. Remember, they're calling it 5e still. I'm really curious because I'm not, and I like playing spellcasters, but I can't find myself being enthusiastic about what's being developed. There have been times where I'm like, oh, okay, this is looking like it's going in the right direction. Now, I've worded this at Wizards of the Coast, but I want you to also think about Kobold Press and Tales of the Valiant, or Pathfinder 2nd Ed Edition. For those of you who play Pathfinder 2nd Ed Edition, or are looking forward to, or playing a retro clone or an older version of D&D, like, what is it that it draws you to the system that you're using and the spellcasters there, and why? Okay? Rather than just focus on Wizards of the Coast, that's what my question's around. But if you're playing and using Pathfinder, Tales of the Valiant, a retro clone, or an older version of D&D, or a completely different role-playing system, what actually makes it stand out for you? That makes magic work for you? Okay. Yeah, I want to talk about it because they did the Illusionist Wizard dirty, as well as the Artificer. The Artificer... Okay, let's talk about the Artificer while you guys are answering that question, okay? I don't allow the Artificer in my campaigns when I am a game master. And neither does anybody else. We've always said the Artificer, for us, is when you run the Eberron campaign. But the other problem is, and I play with min-maxers and power gamers, and one of the biggest problems that we've discussed about is that the Artificer is such a complicated class. It is so poorly designed. It is so hard to actually understand what to do with it properly. That it's nobody really when we said we're not going to use the artificer, nobody cried. Nobody cared in my group. And these are people who are power gamers. Nobody cared. They're just like, I remember Simon saying, it's a terrible class and it's awful. And people said, yeah, it is. And yet, thematically, the idea is really cool. Thematically, it's really cool. It works and makes so much sense in Eberron campaign or world, where you have magic and machines, and making magic stuff is kind of be common. If I was to ever play an Eberron campaign, I would want there to be artificers, but not the 5e artificer, because frankly, it's awful. Charles, what is this? Have you looked into the 1D&D spell list name change? So I did. You're talking about Divine, Primal, and Arcane. Is that right? They've look. The distinct categories have meant nothing as far as I can tell. If so, do you think these distinct categories will help with adding a different feel to warlocks and clerics? No, not in the slightest. I had assumed that by categorizing them, that meant if you got the Divine spell list, then a cleric would have access to all those spells, but that's not the case. That's their list of spells that you get access to as a spellcaster takes from all of these different places. I thought it was supposed to restrict, simplify the idea of, instead of having a spell list for every spellcaster, whatever spellcaster you are, you're only going to be picking from 3 different lists. There are 3 lists and that would be it. And that's not what they do. I don't know why they're even bothering with the categories, and that the distinction is almost unnecessary. It's kind of weird. It's a strange design, and I'm not a designer as such, but it's a strange design dead end. I don't know what they were trying to do with this. I think they were trying to do something else, and they weren't able to follow up. I'm not entirely sure. It makes no sense whatsoever. Completely pointless. What do you got here, Phil? Eldritch Glaive Invocation modified blast into reach weapons and 3E. Manic use at my table. Manic use at my table. Okay. So making a blast into a reach weapon. Each, ouch, each, ouch, each. I don't actually remember that myself, but then I didn't play with everything. It's version 3 had a lot of stuff. Fred, I strongly doubt that the current staff at the Wizards of the Coast will make the classes better. No, I think they, even if they wanted to, I think they are kind of stuck with the kind of pressure that they have at the top. So obviously, Fred, you're not looking forward to it. Luna, I think it's a little better because you aren't scrambling to find the one spell on the one list. Yeah, if they were just sticking to, you pick from one of the 3 lists, that's it. I'd be fine with it, but I just don't think they're doing that. That's not what they're doing at all. You can look. They now have a list of, since apparently you can have spells off. If you're a spellcaster and you're a cleric, you can have a primal spell, and you could have like an arcane spell of some kind, not just divine. Like, okay, all right. Kind of pointless. Prepare, cook, and survive. I'm not really paying it any attention. No, fair enough. We are playing our version of 5e. So I'm doing the same. We will probably be moving over to playing mazes and monsters in the future, my group. But we're playing various different versions of 5e. I run it differently to Simon. Simon runs it differently to me. The others will probably run it differently again. And if anything is being clear, we're starting to realize that we're happier doing it that way, like just doing our own thing rather than relying on Wizards of the Coast and Paizo. I don't think Paizo or Kobold Press are going to offer up any solutions. Like Tales of the Valiant is looking very disappointing, and I don't think their magic system is going to help in the slightest. I think they're just trying to make another version of 5e, really, so they can print it and sell it. Any good would be discussed, okay? Play our version of 5e, and any good will be discussed with the guys. I will implement it if it works. Yeah, fair enough. Yep, absolutely. You're not sure whether you're up for Wizards of the Coast stuff, Luna? Fair enough. No, Pathfinder is not getting an overhaul. I think people have got a little confused by that. Pathfinder 2 is ensuring that their game is their game now. And so anything that uses the OGL or Open Game License that was originally sorted out, set up by Wizards of the Coast, Paizo does not want Pathfinder 2 to have anything that would require them to use the Open Game License or to use the Commons release, the Creative Commons 4 version. So they're taking out all language that would get them into any kind of trouble because they don't believe that Wizards of the Coast won't try this again. And I'm inclined to agree with them. It's also why, so what they're doing is that they're not actually changing the rule system. They're just changing the wording. That's all it is. And it's as simple as that for them. Because, of course, you can't really copyright a rule system. So all they need to do is just word it differently. So certain terminology will change, but it's essentially the same mechanic that they're using before. So Phil, you only enjoy mana pool resources. So you like to have a limited resource of mana, or so spell point systems, mana pool resources. Okay, interesting, cool, good to know. So your first character ever played in 3.5, Artificer Gnome. So Luna, I honestly think that the Artificer was better in 3.5, and I never played it. But I know people talked about it a lot. What do you got here, Chris? I like the magic traditions from Pathfinder: Arcane, Divine, Occult, and Primal. And I think the Pathfinder spellcasters are very thematic. Yeah, I think they've tried to sort of separate them a little bit more. But I don't know enough about it. I'm still reading stuff. It's going to take me a little while. That's a big system. I've played Pathfinder First Ed Edition, not Second Ed Edition, and I didn't really find Pathfinder First Ed Edition to be very much different from 3.5. It was minor changes. There wasn't really much more going on. It was really just a copycat clone of D&D 3.5. with a few very slight mechanical changes, but everything else was identical. Second Ed Edition looks like it's certainly moved a bit further away from the origins of 3.5. Okay. To me, Artificer stepped all over my system of magic item production. And this is there's another reason why I don't like the Artificer just being available in any kind of campaign system, is because it does step on the item creation productions. You know, if you're running a game and you want magic and items to be hard to find, and you don't want people to just be able to make stuff all the time, the Artificer sort of kind of poo-poos that. It's great for those people who want to just, okay, I want to be able to just crank out and make magic items whenever I want. But it doesn't work for a game master. You know? So this is why I found my group, we did not have an issue with like bye-bye to the Artificer. You know, I think there was one person who wanted to play an Artificer, but when we said we're not going to use it, they were like, oh, okay, that's all right. It's fine. I'm all right with that. It was such an easy discussion. It was such an easy discussion. Anyway, Luna. 2E Pathfinder has their magic in lists of Arcane, Divine, Primal, and Occult. So I think Wizards of the Coast got the idea from Paizo. Yeah, they probably did. I think, I think, frankly, in the past, Wizards of the Coast has probably been better at game design than Paizo. Paizo's really good at writing adventures. They're not very good at game design. But I think that's kind of changing now. I know that Wizards of the Coast pinched a lot of the Paizo design team. Like a lot of people who are working on the design team for Paizo are now over at Wizards of the Coast, probably regretting their decision because they can't do the things that they would like to do, I would imagine. Maybe they're getting paid a bit better and that was the only reason to do it. Who knows? What do you got here, Phil? Wizards of the Coast hasn't defined any end goal reasons for revising the game. And it keeps sliding back to 5e with some minor revisions. Yeah, that's exactly it, Phil. I don't think they have a goal beyond money grab and it's degrading trust. So, hi Matthew, how are you doing? How are you doing? So one of the problems, I think, Wizards of the Coast initially, the design team were told, revise the game, improve it, do something with it. We've got 2024, it's going to come out, make the bet in the game better. And then suddenly, somewhere along the line, these marketing surveys come through, and then the upper management are like, don't make the game too different to what it is because we're already programming it for a virtual tabletop. And if you make the rules too different to what it was before, then the programmers have got to change all of the equations that are going into the virtual tabletop. Because we want our virtual tabletop to be able to support all of the mechanics of 5e and the revised version of 5e. So you can't change it too much. I think that's what's happened. They're actually having to build it more around the virtual tabletop. I think that is going to cause so much trouble for them. And that's why they're having to backpedal to 5e. Also, too, when you say to somebody, okay, we're going to revise the game, we're going to make it better, but it won't be 5e, it'll be something else. I want you to think about this. You've just annoyed a whole lot of people who used to play 5e. Okay, maybe not everybody, some people will be fine with it. Then people coming into the game are like, hang on, do I buy 5e or do I wait until 2024 when the new game comes out? And do I play that game? Or do I wait until somebody tells me if the new game's any good to play? And like suddenly I'm like, okay, well, I guess I have to wait a few years before I try Dungeons and Dragons. I actually think it's going to cause a lot of hassles for them. Artificer is fun in a modern Magic game, but sometimes I play homebrew Artificers. Yeah, I think in the right environment, the Artificer works good. In the wrong environment, it won't work so great. Well, I'm glad you don't think I'm wrong about the Artificer 3.5. We don't actually have to agree on everything, by the way. It's all right if we actually disagree on stuff. Okay, what do you got here, Fred? My formula for making a bag of holding. Start with a beholder's stomach. Oh, I love it. That's really... So you've got to go and kill a beholder. Nah. That is so funny. Matthew, what do you got here? Yep. I honestly don't do artificers in my game. This is why. Yeah, this is one of the hassles. When you create a class that fundamentally, and magic items fundamentally change your game world. When you do that, and you create it, and then you say, it's for Eberron, and then you say later on, no, it's for any campaign. It's open the doors now. You've kind of, what you've really sort of done is said, I'm going to shit all over you, game masters, because guess what? Now the player's going to use everything. And you've got a whole bunch of people who are like, no, that's just not going to happen. That Wizards of the Coast seems to be really good at creating animosity between game masters trying to run games and players trying to play characters. Don't know why they keep doing that. It's such a ridiculous thing to do. And yeah, And I think it's hard for a lot of people to get their head around the idea that a game master might run things a little bit different from the official rules. The real reason for the new edition, that's not a new edition, was made obvious with the new game license that caused a revolt. The original reason for, I think the real reason they wanted to have a new edition of the game is because of the 50th anniversary. They believed by creating a new version of Dungeons and Dragons that wasn't really a new version of Dungeons and Dragons in 2024, that they would be able to spike their sales. That, you know, it would mean that people would have to go out and buy the new rule book. I think that's really what it boils down to. I'm sure the OGL stuff, the open game license stuff that happened at the beginning of the year, has been in the works for a while, but I think that's the real reason. I think it was the 50th anniversary. I think that's the real reason why it was kind of being looked at that way. Because you think about it, Dungeons and Dragons 5e originally came out on the 40th anniversary of Dungeons and Dragons. That's deliberately timed. I'm serious. You know, it came out in 2014, Dungeons and Dragons 5e. So we get a new system, you know, with a different way of doing magic for, you know, like clerics worked differently, sorcerers worked differently, wizards got a little bit more complicated, bards were a little bit different, druids were a little bit different, not completely different, but there's little changes here and there. You know, some had bigger effects than others. And I mean, ultimately, it was done during the 40th anniversary, the release of 5e. So we're in the 50th anniversary. They're thinking, okay, well, 5e is doing really well. Can we do a few changes and then release it again and cash in on the 50th anniversary? Like, haha, anniversary, let's celebrate Dungeons and Dragons. I think that's really what was going on there. Whether they had the OGL stuff going on in the background or not, if it had never existed, I think they still would have tried to do a new release in 2024, just because of the 50th anniversary. Okay, anyway, we're kind of getting away from magic and moving off into the other realms, but we'll try to get back on track. Yeah, the top-down virtual tabletop restrictions feels true. Yeah, look, I mean, it's a reality. I think the problem is if you're going to have a virtual tabletop and they take so long to develop, you probably need to make sure you're not wiring all of your mechanics into the tabletop to begin with. It's something that needs to happen later on. You know, if anything, they're going to make it more difficult for themselves, because you think about it, a lot of the 3D virtual tabletops that have been released, or virtual tabletops that do exist now, they can be played with any system. You can use them with any system, doesn't matter what it is, because it's basically just a virtual tabletop. You move counters or tokens around, or you know, digital models around, or miniatures, and on a board, whether it's three-dimensional or it's 2D. That's it. Okay, tokens, miniatures, whatever, and it works for any system. So you don't have to worry about the coding in for mechanics. But you can do that later if you need to. Yeah, I think one of the first things they realized is whatever mechanics you were coding in, they needed to be flexible enough to be able to do anything. Wizards of the Coast is not really looking to build a virtual tabletop that can be used with any game system, and so that's part of their problem. That's why they're kind of stuck a little bit. They created their own problem. Well done, Lena. 3.5 had a great bag of holding system. There was like 4 or 5 different sizes, from small on into huge. AI will make solo adventure adventuring pretty good before it takes over the world. Yeah, look, artificial intelligence for people who can only play on their own. I mean, it's basically a video game, really. It's been around for a long time. It's good. Yeah, I got it. I mean, I think that the wizard tradition was a good start from the artificer when they tried, but yeah, trailed off. Yeah, pretty much. So Cool, blimey! I had no idea that we would wind up turning over so many stones with this discussion. So one of the things I would like to do is, I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to do it, but I'm currently playing Mork Bork or Merc Borky with Wally DM, AJ Pickett, DM Josh, the Beer Bard. Alex is on board, and we've got Dungeon Dad Josiah. We're playing Mork Bork, and it has a magic system in it, and they're scrolls of power. Okay, some are more cleaner than others, and we haven't really had an opportunity to delve into what that looks like. I'm kind of interested to see what that's like. I know that there's a lot of interest in trying out Shadow Dark more, just because it feels a lot more like BECME or basic D&D, but with a new feel. It's got a lot of things that are very, appealing. With regard to what I do with this, usually I talk about rules and I demonstrate them. I don't know what I'm going to do next week, honestly, because I'm getting tired. I need to have a break. I might go back and we might go over some other stuff, because I just don't seem to have the time to be able to study enough new systems and learn them to be able to present them in a live stream. So yeah, Gloomhaven on Steam is very popular. Okay, good to know. Exchanging spell slots for magic items, and you don't get them back until you use the magic item, I thought was awesome. Okay, all right. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I might return to 5e for a little bit, like probably only for a couple of weeks, and then I'll go on a break next week. So this day, same time, I might do that, but I am still not entirely sure, just because I'm not sure where to take this right now, and I might present variant rules that I've come across that I would like to show people and discuss. We might do that as well. I just don't know. So that's where my head is at. As for what's happening tomorrow is my feature day. Tomorrow is, I'm going to look at the Rogue and try to remaster the Rogue. The Rogue, in my opinion, for 5e is probably the one class that needs the least amount of adjustment, frankly. I think as the Rogue goes, in terms of what it's supposed to do traditionally in the past and what it does now, it's pretty close to where it needs to be. But there are some things that are sort of lacking that I would like to include, and so I'm going to start working on that. That's going to be like 4 or 5 hours of me gruelingly going through everything, and hopefully coming out with something out the other end, which I will make available on Patreon once it's done. I would imagine it's going to take me about a couple of days to get that done. So yeah, that was my thought. What's this? Just take a break as soon as possible. Well, I have to plan my breaks in advance for where I work. I don't do this, like, I don't do YouTube full time. I'm not a what do you call it? A content creator? I'm not a content creator. Internet content. I'm not an RPG content creator. Do you know what I mean? So I don't do this to make my real money. My money is made doing my other job, where I work in the health sector. And so I have to actually plan that out. I can't just go now. I have to wait. I think it's going to be the beginning of September. It's about the beginning of September, I believe. So I've got roughly about 4 weeks, I think, before I'll be going on break. So yeah, that's why. Rogue lost flavor of the thief, secondary fighter. Yeah, I agree. Yep. Hopefully I'll be able to sort of correct some of that. Maze Rats has a simple magic system. If I recall correctly, your spells change daily. Oh, good Lord. And that's supposed to be simple. Oh, yeah. So one of the things I don't even have time to read a new system. I literally do not have time. My current job is so busy right now, and just trying to keep up with all of this has been very difficult. So I might just go back and review some of the rules for a game system that I've played in the past. And maybe the easiest way is just to go through 5e again. Like, that might be the way to go. We'll see. Depends on what happens. In any case, I'm going to end this poll. It seems to me mana pools are 46% mana pools. Vancian Magic actually got quite a few votes. What magic system do you think is better? Vancian Magic, 30%. So there's a third of you who said, yeah, no, we kind of like that. Unlimited Magic is really not unlimited magic. Spell failure, nobody liked the idea of spell failure. Nobody liked the idea of... unlimited magic has an aspect of spell failure tied into it. So when I typed in unlimited magic, I knew people would probably gravitate towards it. But even if you have unlimited magic, there's always a spell failure concept going on there. So, yeah. A bit of roguing. Yes, we'll rogue it up tomorrow. Roguing it up tomorrow. Anyway, I'm bushed, and I'm going to go. And I'll be back tomorrow, very early. It'll be 10 a.m. for me. I think if you're in North America... on the, in Los Angeles, which is that Pacific Daylight Time, it would be about 3 p.m. And if if it's Mountain Daylight Time, it would be, take 2 hours off, 4 p.m. And if you're Central Daylight Time, which is like Chicago, that would be 5 p.m. And Miami, Florida, East Coast Daylight Time, that would be 6 p.m. So that's when I'd be starting, and I would be going for about 4 or 5 hours, and hopefully getting as much done as I possibly can. So that's the plan for tomorrow. All right, I'm bushed. So I want to say a huge thank you for everybody who's been here today, listening, watching. I was surprised so many people showed up. Really quite a big, huge surprise. I did not expect this at all. So thank you for being here. Thank you to all of my patrons who support me so I can keep doing this every single week. I do appreciate it. Without your support, it would be a bit of a problem. It'd be hard to keep up with. I want to thank those people who have been commenting in the chat, such as Fred Hubber, Luna, Pale Rider, Matthew, Phil, Charles. Who else did I get? Everybody? There's been a few of you jumping in and out. I had Chris here as well. And Prepare, Cook and Survive. Almost forgot about Prepare, Cook and Survive. You've been fantastic. Thank you for your feedback. You've really kept me going, kept me doing this. And hey, so wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.